Hello. I am responding to the following claim. The education system needs to be reformed in America, whose secondary claims are the following. The ranking of the United States in the top 20 school system around the world. Second, school focus on preparing students for the standardized testing rather than an overall well-rounded education. Third, the education system needs to be reformed by a program. First, I like to say that this is not a proposition. Well, we all know that the education system needs to be reformed and changed, and this claim there is not potential for controversy or conflict. Nobody disagrees with this claim. Everyone wants to reform the education system, but they all want to do it in different ways. It would have been much better if the advocate would have told us what way was more productive. Now let's go back to her secondary claims. Regarding her secondary claims, I have a few reasons why I think there's a problem. In her first point, she claims that the United States is not the highest in terms of rankings. Then she mentions something about money, and then she compares different types of education system between other countries in the United States. First, my response to this is that there is not dispute that the United States is not the highest in terms of rankings. The claim is irrelevant. It does not seem to be applicable in terms of a claim it advances or the basis of the proof it offers. The claim did not include one central idea, since the advocate moved from point A to point B in the same claim. It lacked reasoning for further development of the claim. And even though we're not the highest in terms of rankings, according to the White House, the president has consistently called for improvements in science, technology, engineering, and math education to move American students to the top of the pack by enabling our students to learn deeply and think critically in science and math, expanding STEM education opportunities for students from all backgrounds, and building partnerships among educators, business, and community partners to support the advances in school and technology and other resources. We're not just sitting down, we're trying to do something to improve our system and get to the top 5 in the world. Also, the advocate didn't mention other factors that can potentially influence the students to do bad in school, such as problems at home. It's not always the school's fault. We are now living in a complete different world than we used to back in the 1950s, where when our parents used to help us with our homework and help us study. In her secondary claim, she argues about the school getting students ready for the standardized test instead of a well-rounded education. Well, she never tells us what a well-rounded education is. Also, she never points out what's controversial about this claim. She claims that there's a study. Obviously, there's problem with citation structure. I never found a source. There is no source qualification or data accuracy of this claim. The evidence provided failed to prove the claim. Grounds are unsustainable and weak. However, here are some evidence to show that the standardized test keeps standards high in school. According to Patricia Levitsky, who is the executive director for the Foundation for Florida's Future and deputy chief of the staff for education, who recently published an article this past October 31st, claims that a standardized test ensure schools teach all children to the same high expectations. Without them, history shows that some schools set lower expectations for some students. This is to ensure that they can at least read, write, and do math at a 10th grade level. And that's what we want our school systems to do, right? To guide our students, to guide us through the right pathway. In her third point, she mentions that the school system needs to be reformed by a program. What program? There is no program specification or specified in this claim. The advocate doesn't say what program she's referring to. There are several ways that we could improve the education system. We can have greater discipline in school by enforcing rules. We could change the curriculum and encourage people to do homeschooling. But there was not clear what program she was referring to. The claim is not clear and it lacks evidence to support the claim. The arguers makes a couple of assumptions without supporting proof, which confuses the audience and misleads them. Overall, there was not efficiency in this argument. As a result, the argument failed to provide the necessary rational power to make the arguer's point. She makes several inferences through the whole speech. It brought the audience into a confused stage without telling us what her main or her proposition actually was. Thank you.
All right, you did a good job labeling the advocate's claims and secondary claims at the beginning. You basically suggest that there's not really a dispute over the proposition, so there's not really any controversy because everybody agrees that the school system should be better. Nobody thinks that we want them to decay or stay where they are, so the question is how to make them better. I thought that was a reasonable approach to take, especially when you get to that third point where you're in essence saying the advocate doesn't specify what they think is going to work at making the schools better. I thought that was pretty good. On the first point, the fact that there's no dispute on the ranking is okay, but when you say it lacks reasoning and it's not clear why it's relevant, well, if the way we measure the schools, I mean, let's face it, if standardized tests are the way we're measuring the school performance of the students, why wouldn't the ranking of the countries in school performance be the same kind of thing? I think that's a little disingenuous to be making the argument in one place that says, well, rankings don't matter, and then in another place saying, but we got to have these school rankings to see if we're doing well. So that's, I think, a little bit of an inconsistency. I like the other argument that you make instead that says we are taking actions. It's not like people don't know about this. Now, you make a reference to the current White House calling for improvement in STEM teaching and all those sorts of things. The truth is that there's been an emphasis for 30 years on improving the schools. That's why the standardized tests were being put in place in the first place, because the schools had fallen down. We had lots of criticism of what the American schools were doing, and that's the first step that we've taken to try and address that. The advocate might be saying that first step is not working, although I think you have a good argument on that particular point, that they didn't really prove that point. But I think that the idea is it's not as if we are ignoring this. We are doing something about this. So where is the controversy on that point? I think that was a pretty reasonable approach to take there. Same thing on the second point with the standardized test, where I thought you had a nice piece of evidence here that says, look, this allows us to keep our standards high. Otherwise, how are we going to know whether or not students are getting out of school what they're supposed to be getting out of school? That's a perfectly reasonable question. My question is, why is the advocate saying there's something wrong with the testing? And did they give you any reason to believe that there would be a problem? And I think you need to make that argument a little bit more clearly. And then the criticism at the end about the lack of specificity about what the program is, I thought that was pretty reasonable. And I think you could suggest a little bit of evidence on the potential alternative ways of dealing with these issues. Some of the things we've tried, school uniforms. Some of the things we haven't tried, corporal punishment. I don't know.
Wow.
I'm all for smacking them around a couple of kids here and there. They're knock it off. Shut up. All right. And whether or not homeschooling vouchers, any of those kinds of things might be improvements. I think that there's a reasonable argument to be made there. Just needs to be developed a little bit. I thought you did a really nice job presenting to the audience. For the most part, you're talking to us. You try to explain what you mean on those points. Sometimes I can see that you've got this sort of officious language that you've gotten where if you were using this with a general audience, it wouldn't make much sense. The grounds are inconsistent with the claim, but people aren't going to know what the heck you're talking about. But most of the time, you do a good job kind of explaining what the point was. All right.